As we go into this topic of sharing the Jewish Messiah, as I talk about just some things about Jewish people and stuff, just get us familiar. Lord, may this encourage all of us to be good witnesses to Jewish people. And so I just trust you to use it toward that end. In Yeshua's mighty name. Amen. So again, the first part of our vision statement, our mission statement, is a congregation. It's on the front of your bulletin, and I just want to mention it again. Why don't we all read it together? I've got it on the projection there. Is reach people for Messiah Yeshua, Kiruv, to the Jew first, but also the Gentile, both locally and beyond. So you could say that's evangelism. And then the second one, part of our mission statement, is discipleship. The third part is Jewish identity. So that's kind of what's Adat Yeshua all about. That's those three pillars in being in community, in Messianic community. So we're going through a series talking about our mission statement, and then also Romans 1:16. I mentioned that last Shabbat. Paul, Rav Shaul, says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel." And again, let me just say to you, I hope you're not ashamed of the gospel. Right? I mean, we must not be ashamed of the gospel. We need to stand up for the truth of the Lord. "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Gentile," or some translations will say Greek. So Paul reminds us here, we're all to see the Great Commission. It's not the Great Omission. It's the Great Commission, right? To be witnesses for Yeshua. That we want to see everybody come to the Lord, everybody of all nations, all peoples, everybody around the world. But Paul reminds us here that it wasn't just like in the book of Acts that, the gospel went first to the Jews and then it went to the Gentiles. That's true. But also, I think Paul is also saying here that every believer, not just Messianic Jews, but every believer is to have a burden to see Jewish people come to believe in Yeshua. And so that's why I'm doing this series. So a couple of Shabbats ago, we began, again, sharing the Jewish Messiah. This is part 3. And I began by talking 2 weeks ago about just being a witness in general. And the outline for that one is in our What's New email. So if you were not here, you can look at the What's New email. And I have the outline in there because I think it's so important. Every believer knows some basics about us being the witness that Yeshua wants us to be. And then starting last Shabbat, and we're going to continue that this Shabbat, I'm talking about things in particular about being a witness to Jewish people. Now, I actually, I don't know if you looked inside your bulletin, but the notes from last week are inside your bulletin. So if you weren't here last week, it's there. But I'm going to just quickly go over it so you don't have to write it down. It's already there. And then I'm going to go into new material today. So you look inside your bulletin. So I want to just quickly review it. Some considerations in sharing Yeshua with our Jewish people in particular. It's helpful to understand where somebody's coming from spiritually, what their background is, what their mindset is, so that you can share the truth of God in a way they can understand it and grasp it. And so if someone is Jewish, there's some things that are helpful for you to keep in mind as you would share that with them. So just some general things to know about our Jewish people. This is what I covered last week. Non-Messianic Jews only use the Hebrew Scriptures, or what a Christian would probably call the Old Testament. So you probably already knew that, but in case you didn't know it, I want to make sure you know that. And most of our Jewish people have never read the Brit Hadashah or New Testament. So be aware of that they're ignorant, by and large, of what's in there. Now, it's estimated that there's around 14 to 15 million Jews worldwide. Now, again, it's one of those things where, depending on who you talk to and how they're counting who is a Jew, those numbers may vary. But I'm just saying these are kind of pretty well standard numbers, 14 to 15 million Jews worldwide. There's about 6.7 million Jews in Israel. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can categorize our Jewish people. One way is in cultural ethnic groups. And I went over these last week. Ashkenazi, that's my background as a Jew, Ashkenazi Jewish. Sephardic Jews, and sometimes they break out a third one, Mizrahi Jews, which is like Middle Eastern Jews. Another way to categorize our Jewish people is into religious denominational background, if they have that. And that would be like Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, or sometimes called Hasidic, Hasidim, or conservative, Reformed. Now that's my background as a Jew, is Reformed Jewish. And Reconstructionist. And we would even advocate there should be another one, Messianic Jews. All right. So, all right, but that's not recognized by the Jewish community by and large yet. Okay. And then I'd say for almost half the Jews, and this is really important for you to understand this, for almost half the Jews, their Jewish identity is important and is at least an ethnic, cultural issue. So in other words, think about it. For half the Jews here in America, they're not religious. So, but for them, their Jewish identity is important, and it's an ethnic, cultural issue. And like I said, there is half of them that are religious to some extent. Okay, sadly, non-Messianic Jews typically do not believe that Yeshua is the Jewish Messiah. And I'd say, like all of them would say, oh, well, he's not the Son of God. Okay, so they don't believe that, unfortunately. But we're hope and pray for the day they will believe. All right, and again, why do non-Messianic Jews typically not believe in Yeshua? There's basically three reasons I went over last week. Now, I'm not talking about the theological reason. You know, there's a partial hardening for our Jewish people. That's a theological reason. But three reasons why they don't believe. A common reason is cultural. Just like I was. They are raised as a Jew to say, oh, we Jews don't believe in Yeshua or Jesus. Okay, so that's a major obstacle. I mean, when that's kind of driven into you, or that's what you understand, you've got to overcome that obstacle to believe in Yeshua. So belief in Yeshua is foreign to Jewish people just based on their upbringing. Another reason Jews don't believe in Yeshua is historical. For example, the history of anti-Semitism that's happened over the last 2,000 years. Like my dad came out of what's called today Belarus. And, you know, back actually my dad, he was living in the early 1900s. They had the pogroms back in those days from the Tsar and things like that. And so this anti-Semitism so often was done in the name of Jesus by people that claim to be Christians. And so this is, again, another obstacle that comes up to our Jewish people, because they say, wow, well, if the Christians are like that, why would we ever want to believe in them? And believe in, Yeshua or Jesus. And then also the Holocaust. Of course, that was the biggest anti-Semitic time, was the Holocaust. And then a third reason that Jewish people don't believe in Yeshua is religious and theological. For example, they might wrongly say that Yeshua, he can't be the Messiah because he didn't fulfill the biblical requirements of being the Jewish Messiah. An example of what they'll say is, well, if he's the Messiah, where's the world peace? They'll say stuff like that. And again, there's answers for this. The truth is Yeshua did fulfill the prophecies, and whatever prophecies he hadn't fulfilled yet, he will fulfill when he comes back. Amen. But I'm just saying that's, these are things that we have to deal with in talking with our Jewish people. And then some will say, oh, Yeshua can be the Son of God. God doesn't have a son. I've had Jewish people say stuff like that. It's interesting or not, they don't know what Proverbs 30 verse 4 says. It actually says God has a son. So you can show that to them. It's actually in the Hebrew Scriptures. Yeshua is the Son of God when we properly understand what that means. So again, I concluded last week by saying there is no good reason for our Jewish people not to believe in Yeshua or follow him. Amen. Can I hear an amen?
Amen.
Okay. All right, that's where I left off last week. Okay, today what we're going to cover is some common misconceptions about sharing Yeshua with our Jewish people. Again, to just understand, some things, to understand where they're coming from, overcome some misconceptions. All right, here's one of them. And that is, someone would say, it's very hard to share Yeshua with our Jewish people. Now, let me say, it is true that many, if not most of our Jewish people are not open at this time to believe in Yeshua. But things are changing for the better. And there are some number of Jews, and only God is the one that would know that, there's some number of Jews that are open if they get a proper witness about Yeshua. Now, let me just say, I'm going to mention some statistics, and depending on who's doing the statistics, you're going to get different views on how to count these statistics. So I'm just sharing some that I have heard. Some people would use different statistics. But I've heard it said, and again, and it also depends on how you're counting these people as Jewish. Maybe they'll say if one of the parents is Jewish or even a grandparent Jewish. Okay, it's estimated there could be, I'll put it that way, there could be as many as 250,000 Jews in America who believe in Yeshua. Now, they're not all in Messianic congregations. They're in churches, and stuff like that. And again, it may be just one parent is Jewish, maybe just one of the grandparents is Jewish, so they have Jewish heritage. So it could be as many as 250,000. Some people say, well, it's not quite that many. But it is, let's put it this way, it's more than 100. Okay. I feel safe to say that. Okay. All right, but anyway. And some say it could be as many as 350,000 worldwide. And now, again, when I say that, I mentioned earlier there could be 14 to 15 million Jewish people worldwide. Now, that's probably a number that the Jewish community would say, all right, okay, their mother was Jewish. That's usually the way they would count it. But that number's bigger if you count like the father's Jewish and things like that. So, but anyway, so it could be 350,000 worldwide. Some say, and this was based on a survey they did not long ago when they were asking people some questions, some say it could even be as many as 1 million. But I am not saying it's 1 million out of the 15 million. I think that 15 million would be a bigger number if it's this 1 million. Now, it's estimated that in Israel, there's as many as 25,000 Jewish believers. Now, that's not native-born Israelis I'm talking about. I'm talking about Jews that have made Aliyah to Israel. Some say it could be 20,000. They have done surveys. It's somewhere around there, 20 to 25,000. Now, it is prophesied, if you're not aware, that eventually all Jews, or at least the vast majority of the Jews, are going to become believers in Yeshua one day. Can I hear a praise the Lord? Praise the Lord. Okay, so look at what Paul says in Romans 11, 25 through 26. He says, "For I do not want you, brethren," and he's talking primarily to Gentile believers here, "I don't want you, brethren, to be uninformed of this mystery, so that you'll not be wise in your own estimation, that a partial hardening has happened to Israel," talking about Jewish people, "until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in." Talking about until all the Gentiles become believers in Yeshua, that are going to become believers. And he says, and so all Israel will be saved. Just as it is written, "The deliverer will come from Zion, he'll remove ungodliness from Jacob." And I've shared before, when is this going to happen? When is all this we're going to say? Well, we know for sure it'll happen by the second coming. I mean, for sure by the second coming. In other words, and maybe that's what Zechariah 12 verse 10 is making reference to that, where it says, "They will look upon me or unto me whom they have pierced." So, again, you can imagine when Yeshua starts coming in the air, and this is the second coming, he's coming on the white horse there, and they said, "Wait, he is the Mashiach." Okay, all right. But I even believe it'll happen before he's on the white horse. I believe it'll happen before that, because he said, "I'm not returning to you, the Jewish people, until you say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai." Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So apparently, supernaturally, God is going to cause a great awakening with our Jewish people shortly before the second coming. And then they're going to say, he is the Messiah. They're going to welcome him back as he comes on the white horse. So that's probably how it'll happen, but only God knows for sure how it'll all pan out. So think about it. Our Jewish people is the only ethnic group in the world that's ever been promised, as an ethnic group, they're going to become believers in Yeshua. So it's not promised to any other ethnic group. Now there's going to be believers of all nations and believers in Yeshua, but I'm just saying this is the only one that's ever mentioned in the scriptures. So again, realize by faith there's some number of Jewish people here in the San Fernando Valley. Simi Valley, Conejo Valley, Los Angeles, Southern California. There's some number, only God knows how many, that are open. If they would just get a proper witness, they would come to know Yeshua. So believe that by faith. God is working. Don't feel, if you witness to a Jewish person and they say, oh, I'm not interested in that you failed and they're never going to come around. See, we have to be especially patient in sharing Yeshua with our Jewish people. And again, the reason is because, like I said, these obstacles that have to be overcome, they've been raised not to believe in Yeshua, just like I was. That was a major obstacle that had to be overcome in my life. Or they faced as well anti-Semitism. Somebody's called them a Christ killer or something like that. And there's been things like that that have happened that, again, these are things that have to be overcome. But I just want you to know, God can overcome anything.
Amen.
And that's what we have to pray for. For example, I grew up in the Bible Belt. I'm not sure, and I was in Mississippi. I'm not sure what part of the belt it was, but it was some part of that belt, okay? And I occasionally had Christians that witnessed to me growing up in the Bible Belt. There were a lot of Baptists, Southern Baptists. And some of them were good witnesses, some were not so good witnesses, okay? So I had, a mixture of them there. But again, I wasn't open at that point. It wasn't until I was 22 years old as a senior at Georgia Tech that I met some, again, I've shared before, I lived on a hallway called God's Country because they were all born-again Christians around me. I was the senior counselor of the dorm, all surrounded by born-again Christians. And that's the first, I was in a little Christian shtetl, okay, there in the dorm. But as I got to know these born-again Christians, I saw positive things in their lives that I wanted in my life. A joy, a peace. God, the God of Israel, was real to them, more real than he was to me. And so that got me jealous. See, they were doing what Romans 11 said. They were making me jealous of their relationship with him. And so, but again, even with that, it took 7 more months before I became a believer in Yeshua on April 8th. It was actually Good Friday. That was a Good Friday for me. Okay? But it took 7 more months before it finally hit home for me because I had to overcome those obstacles in my life. Or God was overcoming those obstacles. It took, after I became a believer in Yeshua, it took 15 years before my brother became a believer in Yeshua. So there were things that had to be overcome then. After I became a believer, it was 23 years before my sister became a believer in Yeshua. So I'm just saying, it can take time. So we have to be patient. Now I mentioned, there's obstacles, for us as Jews raised here in America, stuff like that. But here's a contrast for you. Take the former Soviet Union. Okay? Take people from Russia, Ukraine, back in the 1990s, after Perestroika, after the wall fell, I may have mispronounced, after the Berlin Wall fell, things were open. People were going to former Soviet Union to witness. Jonathan Bernis, who we support with Jewish Voice, he took a group over there to St. Petersburg. And when they went there, they had a music festival. They just invited Jewish people off the street to come in there. They had 2,000 Jewish people believe in one service.
Wow.
It's the first time since the book of Acts that many Jewish people at one time believed. Now, how did that happen? Because here was people coming out of an atheistic society. These Jews hadn't been raised that, oh, we Jews don't believe in Yeshua. They didn't really know much about anything. And now they get exposed to the truth. God works in their heart and they believe. And so I'm just letting you know. That's why I say that we in America, we're having to overcome those obstacles. But in some, actually, believe it or not, there's people from Jewish heritage in Zimbabwe that are becoming believers in Yeshua. There's Jews in Ethiopia that have become believers in Yeshua. So again, and because they don't have this baggage that they're having to overcome. Okay, so that's one thing. Yes, you just have. It's not hard, but you just have to be real patient in witnessing to our Jewish people. All right, here's another one. Someone may say, and this will be a Gentile believer, I can't share Yeshua with Jewish people. I'm not Jewish. They won't listen to me. How many of you are Gentiles here? Raise your hand. Okay, so we've got a number of Gentiles here. So I just want you to know, if you're not aware of it, most Jews today came to believe in Yeshua because some Gentile witnessed to them. So I want to encourage you. In fact, for those of us here who are Jewish and believers in Yeshua, how many of us were influenced by a Gentile to become a believer in Yeshua? Raise your hand. All right, so just look at the hands around you. All right, so almost all of us that are Jewish believers, we were influenced by a Gentile. Now, maybe there were Jewish people as well, but there were Gentiles involved. So I share that just to encourage you as a Gentile. God does want to use you to witness to our Jewish people. I've heard it said 91% of our Jewish people had their first contact with belief in Yeshua through a loving Gentile. That's true of me. It's true. Now, let me just say this. Probably one reason that that's true is there's a whole lot more Gentile believers than there are Jewish believers. So there's more odds that you're going to run into a Gentile out there. All right. But also, I'm just saying that nevertheless, as they get to be more Jewish believers, maybe things will change a little bit, but that's fine. In the U.S., think about it. Some people say there's 40 million born-again Christians here in the U.S. At most, maybe there's 250,000 Messianic Jews. So the odds would be a lot better. You're going to run into a Gentile believer, a Gentile Christian somewhere. I've heard it said 80% of all Jewish people came to believe in Yeshua through a Gentile spouse or a friend. Because there's a lot of intermarriage going on between Jewish people and Gentile spouses here in the U.S. So again, sometimes God is using that Gentile spouse to reach the Jewish person. In some cases, Jewish people are more open to hearing the gospel from a Gentile. In some cases. In some cases, they're more open to hearing it from a fellow Jew. In some cases, it doesn't make a difference. Number 3. Again, trying to overcome sometimes misconception. Some people think all Jewish people believe in God and have similar beliefs. You know the old saying, get 2 Jews together, how many opinions do you get? 3, 4, 5 opinions. Okay, all right, that. So the Jewish people are not a homogeneous group where they all believe the same thing. Just like it's not true about Christians, that all Christians believe the same thing. In modern times, and I'm talking about, again, modern times that we're living in, about the only 2 things that you could say would be true of all Jewish people is, number 1, they're ethnically Jewish, and number 2, they've been raised to say, oh, we Jews don't believe in Jesus. That's about the only 2 things you can find in common about almost all Jewish people. Otherwise, anything else goes. As I shared last week, they're Jews who don't even believe in the God of Israel. Some Christians are surprised by that. Yes, there's a number of Jews. There's Israelis who do not believe in the God of Israel. They're atheists or practical atheists. Again, I mentioned at least half the Jews in America are non-religious. Some number of those are atheists or agnostics. They're Jews who are involved in other religions and may still identify as a Jew. I don't know if you've ever heard these expressions before. Have you ever heard of Jew-boos before? Jew-boos. They're Jews involved in Buddhism. They call them Jubus. There's Hinjus. Jews are involved in Hinduism. And they would still say, I'm a Jew. Now, they mean culturally Jew, not religiously Jew. There's Jews involved in the New Age movement. Maybe we'll call them crystal Jews. I don't know. I looked to see if I could find a name for them, but I couldn't find one on there. So I'll come up with one. Crystal Jews. Okay. All right, so they're involved in the New Age movement. There's Jews involved in cults, like Hare Krishna. Years ago, I was down witnessing at Venice Beach, and this big parade of Hare Krishnas was coming through there, and a number of them were Jewish. So I read on the internet that somebody back in the 1980s, so I don't know how true it would be today, but back in the 1980s, when people were, kind of being pretty rebellious, getting involved in all kind of weird groups and stuff, they estimated at least 20 to 30% of the people involved in cults, some of the cults were Jewish. And I think that's probably still, I don't know if that statistic is still accurate today, but there's a number of Jewish people involved in cults. And you say, Michael, why in the world would they be involved in cults? Think about it. They reject the Messiah. They reject the only way they can get saved and get right with God. And so there's a spiritual void in their life, and they're looking for some reality. They're just looking in the wrong places. And so they get involved in these cults and stuff. So again, there's Jews. Again, not all Jews believe in God. Not all Jews believe the same. Okay, number 4. Here's another misconception. All Jewish people are religious and involved in synagogues just like Christians are in churches. Well, as already mentioned, half the Jews in America aren't even religious. So they're not involved in synagogues. Some Jews, if you're not aware of this, only attend synagogues on holidays. How many of you ever heard of Christmas and Easter Jews? They only darken the door of a church on those holidays, Christmas or Easter. Well, there's high holiday Jews. They only darken the door on high holidays. There are Passover Jews, which means that's basically the only Jewish thing they do is Passover. Now, and let me just, actually, I read a statistic a number of years ago. Passover is the most observed holiday of Jewish people. I think I read 94% of Jews in some form do Passover. But understand, I don't mean they're necessarily doing it for religious reasons. It may be a family gathering. They get together, they have a big family meal, matzah ball soup, borscht and all this good stuff. But they eat all this food and everything. And it's kind of like, this happens some in our family, some too, but I know it happens in other Jewish families. They pull the Haggadah out, they read a little bit. Can we skip some pages? All right, so they start skipping pages because we want to get to the meal, right? And there's the old saying, the 4 questions that the Jewish children ask. When are we going to eat? When are we going to eat? When are we going to eat? And when are we going to eat? That's the 4 questions, okay? Not really, okay, but that's what it is in many modern Jewish homes, okay. So again, it's a family get-together, not necessarily a religious experience. All right, number 5, Jewish people, all right, this is a misconception. Jewish people know Hebrew and are experts in the Hebrew Scriptures, and since I don't know Hebrew, they won't listen to me. Okay. Now, native-born Israelis and some religious Jews, they do know Hebrew well enough that they can read the Torah and they know what they're reading. Okay? That there are some people like that. But let me say there's many more Jews that maybe they can read the Hebrew, they can pronounce it, they don't know what they're reading. If you're not aware of that. And then there's some number of Jews that can't even read the Ivrit, can't read the Hebrew. Let me share a little secret with you. There's many born-again Christians and Messianic Jews who know the Hebrew Scriptures a whole lot better than our average Jewish person. Because, Jewish people, and again it varies, they may know some stories, just like I knew as I grew up. They know the story of David and Goliath. They know about Abraham, they know names of prophets and stuff, but they don't really know the Hebrew Scriptures. So that's why I say you probably know much more of the Hebrew Scriptures than many Jews that you're going to run into. So don't feel intimidated. Just love them and share the Scriptures with them there. In fact, even the Jewish people that are involved in yeshivas in Israel or here, they spend most of their time studying rabbinic writings, not the Hebrew Scriptures. They're reading the Talmud, the Mishnah, which is a subset of it, the Gemara, another subset of the Talmud. They're just reading through what Rabbi Rashi had to say about a passage. And again, you look at the Talmud, it says Rabbi so-and-so said this, but Rabbi so-and-so said this, but Rabbi Doug, today's his birthday, Rabbi Doug said this. And whoever's the last one mentioned, that was the predominant view. Okay. And so I'm just saying that they're studying all this stuff. I've shared this before. I'll share it again. When I was in Israel several years ago on one of the trips I had over there, I was walking down to the Kotel, down to the Western Wall there in Jerusalem, and there was an ultra-Orthodox Jewish man. He was dressed in the black garb and everything. He was walking. So I'm just walking along with him there. And we just started having a conversation. He was an American Jew who had come to Israel to study in one of the yeshivas there in Jerusalem. And so I asked him, I said, let me ask you a question. What do you believe is the greatest commandment in the Scriptures? He said, that's interesting you would ask that because we're actually studying that in the yeshiva. And I said, well, what do you believe is the greatest commandment? And so he says, the greatest commandment, there's a lot of mitzvot and, things like that we're to keep and stuff like that. And he was going through all this stuff, which was not the correct answer. And I said, I've heard, which was from the Scriptures, okay? I said, I've heard the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. He says, that's good. and so when we finally got down to the Kotel, he says, well, if you want, you can come pray with us. Our rabbi's over here. And so I said, no, that's okay. I'm going to go pray on my own. And then I dropped the bombshell. I said, well, have you ever heard of Messianic Jews before? And he said, no, I don't think I have. He said, well, I'm one. I'm a Jewish person who believes Yeshua or Jesus is the Messiah. And he's like, okay. He wasn't prepared. But at least plant a little seed in there, all right? So I'm just saying there that, again, just like this guy, he didn't even realize what's the greatest commandment that Yeshua points out. So I'm just saying, do not be intimidated. Number 6, Jewish people, this is, again, a misconception. Jewish people are still looking for the coming of the Messiah, and Messianic Jews and Christians know he's already come. All right, now Maimonides, in the Middle Ages, he was a Jewish philosopher. He came up with 13 principles of Judaism where he was trying to standardize. He was trying to get all the Jewish people together and say, can't we all agree on these 13? And I was just reading a couple of days ago, there were still Jews back in his time that didn't necessarily agree with everything he came up with. But anyway, he came up with 13, and number 12 is the one I want us to focus on. The 12th principle stated, I believe with complete faith in the coming of the Messiah, and even though he tarry in waiting, in spite of that, I'll still wait expectantly for him each day that he will come. Okay, so that's a principle. Maimonides was saying he was looking forward to a Messiah coming. So let me just say this. Orthodox Jews, and especially ultra-Orthodox Jews. Remember I mentioned last week, they're usually in the black outfits, okay, but there are some variations from that. Yes, they are looking for a Messiah to come. And the ultra-Orthodox, the Hasidim, they believe there's things they can do to try to usher this in and to try to speed it up and stuff like that. So that's the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox. How many of you ever saw the film Fiddler on the Roof? Raise your hand. Okay, so in Fiddler on the Roof, you remember there in Anatevia, the Tsar and them, all the Jews got to move. All right, and so they're moving, and then one of the characters, he says, wouldn't now be a good time for the Messiah to come? All right, see, that's a representative view. That is true of some Jews, but not all Jews. They're saying, now's a good time for the Messiah to come. So they're looking for some person to come and bring peace. I'm going to give you another example that's still even true today after 30 years. But in the last 30 years, in Chabad, how many of you ever heard of Chabad or the Lubavitchers? Okay. In the last 30 years, some number of their people believe their former leader, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, was the Messiah. When he was living, some of his Talmudim, some of his disciples would say, "Oh, Rabbi Schneerson, you are the Messiah." And my understanding is he said, "No, I'm not the Messiah." But they wouldn't listen to him. And some of them still persisted to think he was the Jewish Messiah. Now, again, understand that for these Jewish people I'm talking about, they're looking for some person. They're not looking for the Son of God. They're looking for some individual who's a great teacher, like a prophet, who's going to bring peace. So that's what they meant when they were saying he was the Messiah. During the last 2 years of his life, he had a stroke. He wasn't able to talk. Some of his followers got even more fervent. They said he's the Messiah, and he couldn't talk to quench it. And then he passed away in 1994. Now that would, you'd think that's brought a crisis. They're saying he's the Messiah, now he's died. Do you know some of his followers actually said, well, he's going to come back from the dead? They were so believing he's the Messiah, they said he's got to come back from the dead. How ironic. Here's people in Chabad believe the Messiah died and they believe he's going to rise from the dead. And the truth of the matter is the real Messiah, Yeshua, did die 2,000 years ago and he did rise from the dead. And they reject that. So now I'll just so you understand. What would they say to what I just said? They'd say, well, wait a minute, there's a big difference. Okay, here's what they would say is a difference. They say, we're just looking for a man to be the Messiah. But he claimed to be the Son of God. So that's why they're saying that's a different. But they need to look in the Hebrew Scriptures in Isaiah 9, verses 6 and 7, which shows us the Messiah is not going to be just a man. He's going to have deity. He is deity. All right, so anyway, enough on that. Well, not enough on that. Maybe I'll share a little bit. I'll share just a little bit more about that. Some 22 years ago, actually, we had one of our people, they were having a bris over in Sherman Oaks. So I was walking to their house. It was the Cohens, their oldest son, Elijah. He was having his bris. And so I'm walking there, and I ran into actually a Jewish man out on the street there. He says, oh, what are you going to? I said, I'm going to a bris in the house there. He says, really? Well, which shul are you guys involved in? I said, Adat Yeshua. Adat Yeshua? He said, I've never heard of that one before. Okay. And I said, well, we're a Messianic Jewish congregation. He says, I'm a Messianic Jew. I said, you really are? Which congregation are you involved in? He said, I'm in Chabad. I said, what? Why do you call yourself a Messianic Jew? Well, because they believe in a Messiah. So I'm just letting you know, not everybody that uses that. Let me just say that's unusual. That's the only time I've ever run into that. But I'm just saying that there are some use that term differently than we use it. Okay. In fact, even today, 25 years after Schneerson's death, in Israel, and I think this may be true up in New York, there's still some posters claiming he is the Messiah. When I was in Israel just back in May, I saw a billboard. It said he King Melech HaMashiach, King Messiah. Some of them still today. He's been dead for 25 years. And they still believe he's the Messiah. Years before that, this was back in the 90s, I was in the old city of Jerusalem. And there was actually one of these posters on a door of a shop in the Jewish quarter. And so I went in and I asked the lady in the shop, I said, can I ask you a question? I see your poster there. Do you really believe Schneerson is the Messiah? She said, well, that's what we're told. So I'm just saying, I'm not saying everybody in Chabad believes he's the Messiah. In fact, the leadership of Chabad today says he's not the Messiah. But there's still some of the rank and file people that still believe that. All right, so what have I said up so far? There are Orthodox Jews and ultra-Orthodox Jews who are looking for a personal Messiah to come. Okay. Now, but be aware today, there's many non-Orthodox and non-Hasidic Jews who don't believe in the coming of a personal Messiah. Just so you'll be aware, you're going to run into Jews who do not believe in a Messiah coming. For example, my background, Reform Judaism, Reconstructionist Jews, they don't believe in an individual Messiah coming. Instead, what they believe, if they believe it, even this much, they believe in the coming of a Messianic age, a time of world peace that's going to come. And they believe through Tikkun Olam, through repairing the world, they can help bring this world peace. But they're not believing in a Messiah like we believe. So you need to know that. So there's some number of Jews out there, they don't, it's a different framework in their mind. In conservative Judaism, they admit they don't know. They don't know if a personal Messiah, a charismatic individual is going to come, or is that just a symbol of redemption of mankind from the evils of this world. And then if you run into a Jew who's not religious, be aware they probably don't even think about a Messiah. I mean, growing up as a Jew, I never thought about the Messiah. So I'm just saying, be aware, we talk about the Messiah, but they're like, Messiah? What are you talking about? So you may need to even explain to them what you mean by that. Okay, so I just want to make sure that that's clear to everybody. Number 7. Here's a common misconception. Jewish people know all about Yeshua, but they've rejected him as the Messiah. Most Jews are fairly ignorant about Yeshua. Now, they know there was a person that lived 2,000 years ago named Jesus or Yeshua. Okay, yes, they know that. They probably know he died. Okay. They probably heard, some said he was raised from the dead. Now, we know he was raised from the dead, but I'm saying from their viewpoint, they're saying, well, I don't know. They claim he was raised from the dead. And most of them are ignorant of the Messianic prophecies that Yeshua fulfilled. So just be aware of that. This is the mindset that you're dealing with. You say, well, why do they reject him? It's not because they looked at all the facts and they've rejected him. It's more a knee-jerk emotional rejection out of ignorance. Because they say, we Jews don't believe in him. They don't even look at the facts. They just assume he's not the Messiah. As I said, growing up as a Jew, I didn't even think about the Messiah. Now, I did know about Jesus. Okay, I heard his name before in the Bible Belt. You're going to hear about him there. I'm not even sure back in those days that I even thought about, was Jesus even Jewish? I didn't think of him in those terms. Maybe, I don't know. I may have thought he was Catholic. I'm not sure. But I'm just saying that I just didn't even think of him as being Jewish. Now, maybe if I thought about it, I would have said, oh, okay, I guess he is Jewish. I never thought about it. I don't know how many of you ever heard of David Brody. He's on CBN, 700 Club, does reporting and stuff like on political issues. He's a Messianic Jew. He's a Jewish believer in Yeshua. And after he became a believer, he said to his Mom, did you, now he may have said Jesus, I don't know what he said. He said, Mom, did you know Yeshua was Jewish? She said, no, I thought he was Protestant. So I'm just using that as an example to let you know that our Jewish people don't necessarily think of Yeshua as being Jewish. But he was Jewish. He was Israeli. He was a Sabra, native-born Israeli. And also, most Jews don't know the gospel or good news. I mean, they say, well, it doesn't sound very like much good news to them. It's anti-Semitism and stuff like that. But I'm just saying, realize they're ignorant of these things. And again, don't assume a Jewish person you're talking to even believes in God. Because there are Jews that don't. I've had that situation when I was witnessing to a Jewish person. Now, all of a sudden, I found out they don't even believe in God. And let me just say, when you run into that, slap them. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. I'm just joking. Don't do that, please. Okay. All right. But no, if they don't believe in God, now you need to backtrack and you need to talk to them about God. Because until they believe in God, they're not going to believe in Yeshua. I don't have this verse to project, but let me just remind you of Romans 1, 19 through 20. Very important passage. Rav Shaul is talking in Romans 1, 19 through 20. He says, because that which is known about God is evident within them. What is he saying? God put something inside of every one of us, Jews and Gentiles alike, that there is a supreme being. The God of the Bible. And then he says in verse 20, God is evident within. For God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. So what is Paul saying there? He says not only has God put something inside of everybody, that there is somebody bigger than them, somebody greater than them, there's a supreme being. And we know that because you can go out in the deepest, darkest jungles of Africa, and pagans, they believe there's a great spirit in the sky or whatever like that. They don't necessarily call him God, but I'm just saying they know there's a supreme being. But what he says there in verse 20 is, if somebody will just open their eyes and look at the world around us, go out at night like I did many years ago when I was in seminary, and I went to Yellowstone National Park with a fellow DTS student, and we went up there. It was total pitch black. I looked up. I had never seen so many stars in my life up in the sky. No city lights to blanket out. There was just millions and millions of stars up there. It was just so. I mean, if somebody just opens their eyes and they see that, they say somebody had to make this. It just didn't happen. And you know, those who believe in the Big Bang or Big Pop theory, whatever they call it. But anyway, if they say, "Oh, there was a big explosion and that's how everything came about," then just ask them, all right, let's go 1 minute before the big explosion. Where did the big ball come from? They don't have an explanation. You either have to believe in an eternal creator or you have to believe in eternal matter. And matter is not eternal. It doesn't make any sense. And so you can point that out to them and say, that had to come from somewhere. Somebody had to create that. Somebody had to make that. And then you have to say, look at the design of the universe, how complicated it is. There was somebody intelligent that made this. There's intelligent design to the universe. So those are two arguments that you can use. Is the beginning, where did it come from, and then the design of it. Just look at the human body. We couldn't evolve. We're too complicated. Look at one eyeball. It's so complicated, there's no way that could have evolved. So those are two arguments you can use with people to say there is a creator. In fact, we had a Jewish man that was here like a month ago. Was not a believer in Yeshua. And he kind of doubted about some of these things. I just went through it real quick. And he said, oh, okay, yeah, that's right. You know, I mean, sometimes people just need reassurance because they've heard all this garbage on television or in schools that, oh, things evolved. There's a big bang. Oh, like these scientists have it all figured out. No, they don't. Okay, and this is the final point, number 8. Jewish people tend to consider all those who claim to believe in Yeshua as Christians.
That's true.
So just be aware. Jewish people are just kind of lumping all those who claim to believe in Yeshua. They're lumping them all in one thing. They don't realize Jews can believe in Yeshua and still be Jewish.
That's right. Amen.
And initially, they don't differentiate between those who are true Christians and those who just claim to be. And initially, they don't differentiate between the different denominations. I mean, when I came to believe in Yeshua, I didn't know the difference between Catholic and Baptist and Presbyterian and all that kind of. I don't know anything about that stuff. So they just lump everybody together. They think, they all pretty well believe the same thing or whatever like that. And initially, they don't differentiate between true Christians and Christians involved in cults. So what we need to do, whether we're a Messianic Jew, born-again Christian, however you call yourself, we want to be the best witness we can be to them. And let them see the truth. And help them overcome any misconceptions or things like that. So I'll just say, I'm going to continue maybe in a couple of weeks on this. I won't do this next week because of the concert on Friday night. I will be preaching next weekend, so still come. All right, so I just want to say this as we close. Think about the Jewish people that you know who are not yet believers in Yeshua. I don't know if you've thought of doing this. Why don't you make a list and pray for them as often as you can, that God will work in their hearts and open up their hearts, open up their eyes, bring situations into their life that will make them open to believing or even hearing the gospel of Yeshua, and pray for God to give you divine opportunities to be a witness to them and to even bring up spiritual conversations with them. So please do that. Really, God can do so much through prayer. There's an old saying that we'll go no farther than we do on our knees in prayer. So be praying for these people you work with. Pray for your Jewish attorney. Pray for your Jewish CPA. Pray for your Jewish neighbor. Be working in their heart. I have a list of Jewish people I pray for that are not. I'm just praying, God, give me opportunities. And He does give me opportunities with them. But I'm just saying that we're praying to see their eyes be open, the scales be removed, and then come believers in Yeshua. Okay, so let's close in prayer. So Lord, I just pray for everybody here. I know it's not like a typical expository sermon, but Lord, we've talked about a lot of cultural things just to try to help us understand where maybe Jewish people are coming from, and depending on their background, they come from different viewpoints. But Lord, I pray as a result of this series, there's going to be more Jews, and I pray Gentiles as well, more coming into the kingdom of God, that we'll seek to be the very best witness that we can be. We're all spiritual billboards. We're all spiritual commercials. May we be good commercials. May we be good billboards. So people see it and they say, hey, I like what I see. I want that. And I pray if there's anyone hearing my voice today, maybe it's on the internet, maybe it's here, and they're not yet a follower of Yeshua or Jesus. I pray God work in their heart today, and that they would say, I believe that. I trust Yeshua to come in my life. Forgive me of all my sin. Give me eternal life so that I'm going to go spend eternity with God and with the Messiah. And they would recognize Him as the Lord of their life. I pray, God, that they would do it. I know it was the greatest thing that happened to me as a Jew. It's the greatest thing I've ever seen it happen in any Jewish person's life. And it would be the greatest thing to happen in their life as a Jew or a Gentile to make that decision. We pray this in Yeshua's mighty name. Amen. All right, if you'll please stand, let's receive the Lord's blessing as we go. Again, we do have an oneg over in Holland Hall. It's 2 buildings over. Danny and Ellie are going to be at the exit. If you have any questions about the Havurah that they're planning to start, whether you're single, whether you're married, you hope to be married someday, however your categories you're assigned. Okay. All right, let's receive the Lord's blessing as we go. And again, next Friday night, required attendance for the concert, okay, for Joshua Aaron. And then next Saturday, required attendance. Be here, all right? So both Friday and Saturday. All right, so let's receive the Lord's blessing. Yivrach Adonai v'yishmarecha Ya'er Adonai panav alecha v'chunecha Yisa Adonai panav alecha v'yasem lacha shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom or peace. Shabbat shalom. Good Shabbos.